Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fifth session of Recycled Architecture Virtual Talk Series. Last week's session with Amar Kalo was interesting. I'm confident this week's session will be quite significant and valuable. These talks are hosted by the Middle East Innovation Leader and Pioneering Force for Sustainability, BIA, in collaboration with Khazan Park. BIA ventures range from waste management and renewable energy to sustainable transportation and environmental consultancy. Their new headquarters is set to launch at the end of this year, is an architectural marvel, and by far the office of the future that emulates the company's twin-pillared strategy of sustainability and digitalization. Today, we are delighted and honored to talk to Asif Khan, who in 2007 has established the London-based Asif Khan studio that designs buildings with which support new ways of thinking about the world and ourselves. Asif works internationally on a wide range of projects, from large cultural buildings and landscapes to experimental structures. He has taught at the Royal College of Art and Musashino Art University. Recent works include the New Museum of London, currently under construction, the blackest building on Earth, the Hyundai Pavilion at Pyeongchang Winter Olympics 2018, the carbon fiber Expo entry portals, and over 6 kilometers of public realm at Dubai Expo 2020. In addition, a forthcoming museum of manuscripts in Sharjah. A finalist in the competition for the Helsinki Guggenheim Art Museum, Asif was awarded Architect of the Year in 2018 by the German Design Council and received the prestigious MBE for Services to Architecture in 2017. Now, important notice to our audience, as you know, guys, please feel free to ask questions in the comment on BIA's YouTube channel, as we are live on it now, and I will make sure to read them to our speaker. So welcome, Asif, to our talks. Before we delve into our main questions, please tell us a little bit about your journey thus far and what really inspired you to do what you do.
Hi, George. Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So my journey began in London. I was born in London. At school, I studied a whole variety of things. I actually had this problem that I'm interested in everything. And maybe a lot of architects out there had the same problem. At some point, I wanted to be a doctor. At some point, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a scientist. But I was trying to find a way to put all of my interests together. I took a year out instead of going to medical school, and I studied at the Prince of Wales Institute of Architecture, which was at the time a small school dedicated to learning craft skills. So I spent a year like mixing fine art, drawing, painting with craft skills. You know, how to make wooden joints and welding and all that sort of stuff. And then began at the Bartlett School of Architecture in London, which at the time was Professor Peter Cook was in charge of. Fantastic education, very creative. And out of that, I went to the AA in London, the Architectural Association, which everyone also would have heard of. Some great people there, the history, legacy of Lassa Hadid and Rem Koolhaas and other fantastic people there. And then out of that, I started my own studio. I'm going to actually show you, I decided today I'd show you the first project I ever did, because the first project is actually an example of recycling architecture. Because I think when you're starting off as a studio, you think more efficiently and you think more innovatively about how to work with building materials. So this is the beginning. In 2007, when I started the office. And now, 13 years later, we're about 25 people in size and still based in London, very global. Studio works in many countries. People are remote working at the moment because of COVID. I'm sure everyone at home is doing the same, but we're still love what we do. We have a big office, lots of making facilities, not just 3D printers. We're CAD camming, and we have a big fabrication space for testing mock-ups. I'll show you some images of that later. Yeah, we're trying to, as you said, support the future of what architecture can be through our work.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, George.
Okay, so Asif, tell us a little bit, what is your philosophy on the role of recycling in architecture?
Well, I'm gonna sort of try and cover in this talk a little bit of that. So I don't have a mantra which I'm gonna say to everyone, but I think from the beginnings of architecture, from the beginnings of nature, it's in our nature to be recyclers, essentially, whether we like it or not. I'm sure even the hardest politician who insists on using natural resources and continual manufacturing is at heart a recycler, because that's how all species on Earth live and survive. And I think I'm going to go a little bit into that during this talk to remind us a little bit, and in a way to remind myself, because lockdown, I think, for everyone has been a time of self-reflection and I think challenging ourselves with ideas that we had in the back of our heads, and we needed to reinvigorate. So I think it's very important, essentially, and I think it's a natural process which we need to tap into and ensure is part of the future of architecture.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not easy, you can never be 100%, sustainable, and you cannot be 100% natural, especially, in our field. So I can relate to that very much.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that everyone is facing. And I think often there hasn't been this sort of backup from having an overarching challenge in the world as there is now. I don't think there are more people on Earth than there ever have been. There are worse climate conditions now than there ever have been, and people are only increasing in number. Cities are multiplying. By what is it? By 2050, I think there's meant to be, in order to meet the shortage of housing, we're going to need to build one Manhattan city of housing per month, excuse me, not per day. That's an enormous amount of construction, but also enormous amount of opportunity to change the way we do things. And I think the challenge is out there. I think designers, clients, governments have to work together to find solutions, and that's it. We've done it before as a species. We're still here. Just
for now.
Yes. So why not? What's the other option?
Absolutely. Okay, so can you? I mean, does recycling mean automatically sustainable for you? Can you please give us just your input or your insight on that?
I think recycling is one. I mean, I like the title of your talk, and actually the title of the series, because digging into that, you'll see there's some fantastic examples I'm going to show you. But for me, sustainability is more a point of view about how to operate and how to consider. There's many types of sustainability, economic, social, and also kind of material, energetic. So I think that's a whole sort of a very broad topic about how, I think you could almost say, how to do things responsibly. And if you look at what I encourage everyone to do who's listening, is just look at the United Nations Millennium Sustainability Development Goals. You'll find there's, I think, 17 of them. They are, they're just the most common sense things that you can read as a human being. You could give it to a child, and the child would say, "Oh yeah, Dad, this all makes sense. Is that how the world works?" And you say, "Well, it's simple, but no one really does that." Which is strange, because it's all it's saying is, if the Earth is a machine, it's just saying, hey, here's how to operate the machine. If it's a car, it's saying, here's how to drive. It's the manual. It's going to work. You put fuel in here. Exactly. It's going to go. But I think a lot of them feel like really, really difficult to do. For some reason, it's strange. And it's just about, sharing wealth, helping people have social mobility. Recycling is one of them. Circular economy is just one of the things it talks about. So they're not the same thing. But they are part of each other, and I think if you're not doing this recycling thinking, and I mean, you mentioned it, it's not on my agenda in every project as a kind of number one topic, but it's something that have been thinking deeply about from the beginning. I think everyone has here, but we haven't always been practicing what we've been thinking. And I think that's part of this moment in time, is to have a change in. It's an opportunity for a change, and an opportunity to kind of to improve the efficiency of what we do and how we do it. This is my thinking. Circular thinking, circular economy, and recycling are fundamental, but the sustainability is a much bigger topic, which is even more important.
Yeah. Also, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, it's difficult to break the habit. I mean, we're used to do some things certain ways, and now we have to change. I mean, as you mentioned, this is like a period and a time where it's a crisis, but it's an opportunity for us to, to rethink and really change, for the better future, for us and for, future generations.
Exactly. I mean, I think I give an example, which is not architectural, but it's to do with the city. During lockdown, I've been buying pasta sauce from this Sicilian delicatessen, which is 50 meters from my house. So I'll come back. My kids love it. So I'll come back with a glass jar with this stuff in it. And I have now, 30 glass jars in because I don't want to throw them away. They're beautiful jars. So we've been trying to fill them with jam. We've been making jam. We buy the fruit from somewhere else and we've been making jam. We tried to grow fruit, didn't work very well. During lockdown, everything died. But
challenging, challenging, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks it's easy, it's not.
Yeah. You think you can become a farmer in 3 months? It's not possible, but it's difficult, right? But we're only producing enough jam for ourselves. We don't have the kind of network, because the way that we're isolated from our community, our neighborhood, family lives somewhere else in London. So I can't fill up those jars with enough stuff to make the jars useful. But if I could, I can make a sort of a useful economic cycle there, where I can kind of be accepting something and giving it away. And I think at a core level, we want to do it. I'm accumulating glass jars, but sometimes the mechanics aren't quite there. The same goes for deliveries that we get, plastic packages. What do you do with these things? So it has to happen. The will has to be there from everyone. That's the thing, and that's the challenge. Which I think it's coming. It's coming now. It's late, but it's the feeling of responsibility is coming.
Okay. So Asif, when one thinks about recycling, I mean, the first topic that comes to one's mind is materials, right? So, but if we keep materials on the side, I mean, can you tell us, or can you show us, or can you, just give us what is your insight? I mean, where architecture itself can be recycled?
Well, I tell you what I'll do is I'll start to share some slides,
please,
if you don't mind, and we will. Let me just get this on screen.
Perfect.
Okay. So, and I'll give some examples from my work, which are, I think, what I'd like to do is give you a sense of my history a little bit, then the importance of materials to me, and material exploration, which I think is a core part of the office. We're sort of research laboratory sometimes in the way that we work, but that's the kind of origins of it, the way that we think. And then I'd like to give some examples from the history of recycling in architecture. Let's see, and this idea of spolia, which is a term from kind of the Roman Empire, but I think every dynasty has had a word for this, which is essentially reuse of materials in new buildings. And then I'll talk a little bit about nature, I think we've got about 30 minutes. So I'll kind of zoom through some of it, and feel free, George, to stop me if you want to ask questions. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So,
absolutely. But we're here. We want to listen from you, but I'll do that.
Okay. Please, let's try and make conversation.
Yeah.
I'll just start with this thought, which you can hold in your minds for the while you're listening. Your waste is tomorrow's architect. Thinking about this, the architecture of tomorrow, the architecture of yesterday, and what we produce. But essentially, what would be amazing, I mean, in this sentence is the idea of circularity, but the awareness of circularity. It's like karma. It's going to bite you back at some point, right? So it might not be you. It might be the generation after you. But this is a kind of awareness which we have to have. Okay. So this was the first project I did. I mentioned it in 2007. West Beach Cafe. It's in Littlehampton on the south coast of England. Beautiful little town. And it's a beach cafe. They serve fish and chips. Fish and chips taste better in the sea air. I think we all know that. But this building wasn't constructed as a new building. This building began life like this. So this was the inheritance of the previous generation, right? So this is a burger kiosk. And my client bought this because she'd seen crazy renovation plans for it to turn it into a 2-story, super ugly thing in a very nice on the sand dunes. So it's a lovely site, but the proposal would have destroyed the site really. So she took a responsibility towards it and said, what can we do to transform this? And so by adding an element in front of it, which is a kind of steel gate, let's say, which have windows in it, we were able to extend the volume of the building and transform it from a kiosk into a restaurant cafe. And the simple move of the frontage being able to open up to the view allowed the kind of inside to become outside and the outside to become inside. So we kind of multiplied the functionality of the architecture, the aesthetic of the architecture. We reused a building in a new form. No one really thinks of this as it's the burger kiosk. It changed name. It's called the West Beach Cafe. It's a new building, but it's in the body of an old building. So this thinking about creativity and new beginnings and the possibility behind things, I find that very interesting. We all you can look at your wardrobe, your clothing wardrobe, and readjust things that feel old and they become a fresh look. And I think this is something we can do with architecture. We shouldn't feel we will have to build a new thing. Some of this thinking at a bigger scale took place when we were doing the UK pavilion in Astana Expo. And this pavilion, as you're having your in the region, your expo in Dubai, in 2017 in Kazakhstan there was an expo, and the theme of the expo was the future of energy. And rather than kind of talk about solar panels and or distributed power systems and so on, like what we chose to talk about is the beginning of energy. And so I'll kind of walk you through the exhibition. It starts when you enter this space. You enter a black space actually, and you just hear a sound, and it's just a note, a very deep note. I won't try and sing it, but it's a note that Brian Eno, the great musician, we kind of invited him to collaborate, and Brian created this note for the beginning of the universe. And so 13.8 billion years ago is where the project begins. And there's a text on the wall written by Catherine Hans, who's a astrophysicist who also was a collaborator on the project. And it says, 13.8 billion years ago, the Big Bang and the transformation of energy into matter. And that matter comes forward and creates stars, and stars like our own, the sun, they collide together. Hydrogen atoms, helium atoms, and they fuse into this energy source. The energy source then is the reason behind everything we have, basically. Every bit of life on Earth is because of this moment 13.8 billion years ago, and the way the sun heats the Earth, heats things, creates climatic conditions, creates a kind of secondary particles, which the sun is ejecting, which become larger things, which can build carbon, life forms, everything. It's all sort of begins with that energy source, the sun. So we created at the center of this this space, this panorama, which is a landscape. It's an animated landscape. I think it's 40 or 50,000 pixels wide, to give you a kind of computer-based dimension. And it's just simulating the Earth's climate and landscape. So it's a computer simulation. But you look out to that landscape from a kind of center point, which is this structure. So we go from the universe to the sun, to the Earth's landscape, and then to human beings. So this is you might recognize this. It's a sort of play on the Kazakh yurt, right? The yurt is a structure which has been used by human beings for thousands of years. This yurt we used as an example of, in my opinion, the most sophisticated, an example of the most sophisticated relationship we can have with nature. And that is, and this is not a true yurt, this is a kind of abstraction of a yurt, but it's a structure which is inherently recyclable. It's a structure which is portable. It's low. It can be transmitted to the next generation because it's completely reusable. Every element in it can be switched when it breaks. It's modular. It's made from these series of wooden spokes. I mean, this example isn't, but the traditional one is. It's dressed in felt, which is made from sheep's wool. The felt is renewable. The felt is an insulatory blanket, which can change. It can be dressed up for the winter or cool down for the summer. So it's a piece of architecture which I think epitomizes what we would like all our architecture to be, which is like responsive, mobile, energetically pure, low cost, transmittable to the future generation. And you know what's more? It's a circle, right? Which is like the most brilliant symbol of social life we have, which is the family, right? So in every way, symbolically and kind of physically, it's the most sophisticated architecture. So that was this example that the universe, the energy, and the architecture itself can be one thing. It's been done before, and this was the example of that. That's why we talk about future energy is the history of energy, basically. This is sort of 2017. This year we've been working again with materials at another scale, but also trying to see if we took one material to the absolute limit, what could we do with it? And here we worked at the Dubai Expo. You're seeing images here of the portals, which are the entrance gateways to the Dubai Expo. We made 3 of them. We've been working for about 3 years on it, and you'll see them. All your visitors, all of you guys listening, will walk through these when you enter Dubai Expo in 2021. They're waiting for you there. They'll be waiting for a year. These are entranceways, kind of spirit of entrances to great cities, to great citadels and forts. We wanted to create this kind of feeling of wonder of entering something, but also a cool space that allows shading. So it's a mashrabiyah in the purest sense, but a mashrabiyah which is made from one material, and actually it's gone through a process of weaving to make it. So it uses carbon fiber, which is a material 80% lighter than steel with the same kind of structural performance. And this material is woven. It's a fiber, composite fiber, and which is woven to create a repetitive geometric pattern, which at once is the minimal amount of material needed to support it, with the largest open area to allow for airflow, with the maximum shading that we can allow, which we can enable, and the minimum material used. So we have this kind of equation of efficiency, doing the most stuff, doing the most things with the least stuff, is a way that I think our bodies work. You know, a tree works in that way. There's no fat on a tree. But so it's kind of idea of can architecture do the same? But in looking backwards and looking at the Mashrabiyya and the kind of, let's say, backwards as in the history of structures, we can also get inspiration for the future, which is what this is, and it's trying to be a kind of manifesto at Expo for possibilities. So I think I'm going backwards. Hold on, there we go. Okay, so here you see that at the entrance to Expo. At the Museum of London, what you're seeing here.
I will stop you just for the previous one. I mean, can I, because I have a lot of affinity for this. The beautiful thing that you did here is like you feel space is here and not here. It's like this ephemeral type of space that it's very difficult to accomplish. And when you look at this the structure, it is there, it is massive, at the same time it is not there. This is beautiful. I mean, I have to stop you and tell you this, and thank you for that, really, because it's very rare to be able, it's like an abstraction, it's very rare to be able to create space that is there, but then it's not there. And I think you really nailed it there. So I have just to tell you that.
Thank you. Thank you, George. I think for the a little bit I add to it, then, the team that worked on this were the most amazing collaborators. From the engineering is done by an aerospace engineer, like who designs aircraft. The team from the Dubai side, the guys at Expo who believed in it, to this kind of so many scientists, like amazing manufacturer. We made it in Germany, in components, piece by piece, researching. The guys in my studio, every single element of this was mocked up, tested. It's been like an amazing process. But what I wanted to do, which I hope it does, is at Expos, what you want to do is talk about not just see the world, but also show the world something, and show the world what you can be proud of from the region. And I think what you'll see in Expo is so many examples. I mean, this is one of them, of like new takes on the gifts that the region has to offer, architecturally, from nature, philosophically. So this is basically saying, it's making the world walk through this, which I think is, I love that.
Beautiful, brilliant, yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Please go ahead, continue. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I had to say that.
No, it's fine.
So thank you. Go ahead.
Again, we have an amazing team working on this project. So we 4 years ago we won with Stanton Williams Architects and Julian Harrop Conservation Architects in London. We won a big competition, which is the largest cultural project in Europe, and it's the transformation of a Victorian market building, which was built in the 1880s, into the new Museum of London. This building was in terrible condition because it's been derelict for over 20 years. So what I show you here is the image of timber that was grown over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Very, very, it's like virgin growth pine from Siberia. And this was used in the building because there was plenty of that stuff around at the time. So it's almost like hardwood. It's so strong. This material is being salvaged from parts of the building which we are not keeping. Some internal parts are being salvaged, and it's being reused for the roof. It's being reused for flooring. We want to make a building. The building's been here already 150 years. We want that building to continue to exist for hundreds of years. So it's transforming from a market building to a museum. So a lot of museums would say, let's knock down this market because it's going to be inappropriate for use as a museum. It's going to be expensive to transform it. It's in bad condition anyway. This is images from the last century. But I think the new way of thinking about things is to say, what opportunities does this building give a museum? Well, firstly, a Museum of London having a building which itself is part of the history of London is very interesting, right? The building becomes the biggest item in the museum's collection. The collection is 7 million objects, but they don't have a building. So this is very interesting. So looking around that, you see the history of London, but also the market structure allows you to enable new ways of using space. So while you have market stalls, now we can have partner institutes which come in, which become join the ecosystem of the museum, smaller institutes. So it can be more like a coral reef of institutes rather than a singular institute. It's kind of a new way of looking at things. This is just an image of the transformation. It's 3 buildings which can comprise what look like normal shops are kind of part of the museum content, and we're connecting the buildings in new ways. But really, why I show this is there's so much beauty in what you discover in places like this that we want to capture, and we want to not get lost. And we're doing it at a crazy scale. It's 33,000 square meters. It's London's greatest hidden ruin, really. And as cities evolve over time, the more, let's say, obsolete, you'll end up with more and more obsolete buildings, right? And I think the point about this is to say, actually, we can use them, and we can use them we have to have them for new uses. And that's something, it's a kind of metabolistic process or cannibalistic process. And there's something wonderful about it because it creates new possibilities for the programming of those buildings. So this we discovered, our conservation architect, Julian Harrott, discovered behind the walls in this space in the market were the remnants of a cocoa house, which was where people would come and drink cocoa in the, at a time when it's complicated, long story, but it's a very exciting discovery. This is what the interior of the market's going to look like. We're kind of combining old and new. We're trying to think of new ways of displaying work. The curators are working with us on it, and taking a kind of dark space and transforming it into a light space. Now, we're not the only ones doing this. There are examples which I want to show you of like fantastic works from around the world, and I say we're not doing it with all our works. When we have a chance to do it, it's a kind of gift, and it's very interesting when we do it. We're just trying to kind of explore this. But this is the work of Wang Shu, who's a Chinese architect who won the Pritzker Prize. I'm sure a lot of you know his work already. In 2012, he won the Pritzker Prize. Now he's been working in kind of rural China for since the 90s, and I think what was interesting when he graduated. He up to the end of the 90s, he kind of went and worked with artisans in rural China, just learning everything he could. And what they were having at the time, even some of his early buildings, because China was going through a process of mass demolition of the old material and rebuilding new cities, even some of the buildings that he designed in the 90s got knocked down. And I think that was the kind of atmosphere around the kind of fast construction of cities. This Ningbo History Museum, which in itself is fantastic. The idea of history is embedded in the material language of the building, right? So what you see here is the reuse of the remains of demolished buildings. Through the process of his construction, he and his team, they retrained artisans to use these old materials. Yeah, and they use those as part of the surface materiality of the building. They use lots of concrete as well, but when you walk around this building, what you're seeing is a kind of archaeology of architecture from China. He's reskilled people to use these materials, and through that process created a kind of amazingly rich textural quality about the buildings. And he says we must not demolish history in order to redevelop. His office is called Amateur Architecture Studio. The technique you see on the right-hand side, they call it wapan. And wapan means to combine elements which are of different sizes to pack them together to create a stable structure. And I'll show you another example of that in a minute. This is an example from your neighborhood, George. This is Kazan Park, and this is one of my favorite bits of architecture. It's where this talk series should be held. We'd all be there in Dubai. This is a project done by Rashid and Ahmed bin Shabib, and it's a project which is a restaurant, bookshop, library, kind of civic space in the middle of the park. This uses coral stone, which is a historic building material in the UAE. And the coral stone has been reclaimed from demolished buildings from old Dubai. Very simple thing. And it's put back together in these gabions, and it's used to create the walls, but at the same time also incredible texture, biological in detail. The coral is incredibly beautiful. And it connects this building to the history of Dubai, which otherwise is getting lost. So this is a fantastic example from your neighborhood. This is another example which I love, which I discovered when digging a little bit in my filing. This is a project we designed as a kind of proposal 5 years ago. It was for Art Dubai. It never got built, and the idea was to collaborate with BIA to use recycled materials. So we had completely forgotten we did 5 years ago, and it's very simple. It's just a solar observatory. So it's for looking at the sun, and it's a pile of crushed concrete essentially, with a concrete structure inside, which is made from reused concrete pipes, essentially. So this, as a company, BIA, I think it's very interesting. There's lots of potential to continue working on stuff like this, and architecture and creativity have a kind of role as a kind of packed together. It's very interesting, not just to claim materials, but to reuse them. This is a fantastic project by Studio Drift. I don't know if the audience has seen this. I love this project. It's called Materialism. And what they did is they studied the iPhone. What are the embedded materials within that? Look at the gold, look at the glass there. You see all of the materials embedded in the electronics. A water bottle again, there's 3 or 4 types of different material used. What they want us to do is contemplate on what materials we're touching in our daily lives, but really, if they think about them as raw materials, what could they do with them? What are at their disposal? So VW Beetle here. On the right is an AK-47. It's fantastic. It's beautiful, really. And on the left is a bullet. So this is it's a kind of scary example, but it's on the right is it's the most produced weapon in the world. Who would imagine there's a beautiful piece of wood locked in that that has a potential to be turned into something else? Okay, there's a company which we found, which is fantastic. The EME, something that's worth knowing about, and everyone should check out. It's called the Excess Materials Exchange. So this is basically trying to put those ideas into an organized database, which all of us can draw upon. Okay, so this is a Dutch organization. What's interesting, ABN AMRO, the bank, is investing in these guys. And why is that? Okay, so they believe that when you make a project, a piece of architecture, a piece of a car, a new product, that should get a passport, and on that passport it says what resources are inside it, and that the passport stays with that thing for its whole life. Over the life cycle, those resources can be bought and sold to a future user, and you matchmake those resources and the kind of future value of those commodities as though they were a mining prospect, as though you were saying, if I made a housing estate, I could say, or this new city quarter, I can say, okay, well, the value of the brickwork here, the value of the steel I've used is, 100,000 tons. Who would like the future value of that? And let's make a matchmaking in 50 years time. This will be available to you in 150 years time, because we all have this idea that architecture is permanent, but it never has been. It never will be. It's always being recycled. It's always being changed. So why is this important? It's not just about being like sustainable and everyone thinking good of us. It's a materials bank. Banks are interested because it's estimated by McKinsey that, they did a real serious calculation about circular economy. McKinsey said by 2030, $1,800 billion is the value of the circular economy. $1,800 billion. This is big money, and we're throwing it away. It's not just to be good, to feel good about ourselves. It's about making a lot of money that's being thrown away. So you're starting to see that in small ways. The Design Museum has an exhibition next year called Waste Not, which is kind of dealing with this topic. E-waste is a major topic. I can't go into that, but architectural waste, the waste of cities, is something that is massive, and we should all think about. And if we want to make money, it's a big field for that. Now, just some examples from the past. This is Issei Jingu, Issei Shrine in Japan. audience don't know about this, it's a building which is rebuilt every 20 years.
20
right?
years.
It's got its own, like, it's got its own kind of cycle. It's a great
This
example
this is a perfect example of recycled space. I mean, it can be, so that's a perfect one. Yes.
Now, the interesting thing about Ise Jingu, it's been happening for 300 years. There was a shrine here for, I think, 2,000 years. But there's this principle, Shinkin and Sengu. So Shinkin and Sengu, it's a kind of idea of this renewal. And there's lots of reasons because of Shintoism why they're doing that. But they're growing a forest there. They're growing trees. And every 20 years, the building is completely rebuilt. This is just the best image ever. On the right, you see the old Ise Jingu, and on the left, you see the new one. So this is constantly the period. Then it'll flip around, and the materials that are not that are used from the 20-year-old one, as it's dismantled, they will be distributed amongst the shrines of Japan. Thousands of shrines I have there, and the raw material will be used. So this is a kind of material bank again. For all of those shrines, it's distributed. So that's a bit like the kind of holy water going out to all of these, churches or whatever. They're doing that with the materials, and of course, it's a natural material. It's grown in the forest there. It's a very there's a philosophy behind it. It's part of the culture, and I find that very interesting. So recycling is not something that's done just for practical reasons. It's done to connect this place to the wider community. It's also to create and keep a culture going. So that's something very beautiful. I mean, you see, this is the new one. It's in fantastic condition. Okay, so here's an example which I visited right at the beginning of this year. This is in Bodrum in Turkey. You may have visited this. It doesn't exist anymore. It's the Colosseum, the mausoleum at Halikarnassus, and it's the off Halikarnassus. So it's it's where the word mausoleum comes from. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was built for Mausolus, and it was around 350 BC. Marble structure. It was at a size it had never been built before. Something like this. It's like 43 meters high. Of course. What happened to this was this, right? Over as a dynasty changed, as it happens through history. So our monuments, as I said at the beginning, your architecture well, I said it the opposite way around. I said your waste is tomorrow's architecture, but if you look at it the other way around, your architecture is tomorrow's waste. So what is the architecture that happened from this waste? Well, this was it. This is the castle at Bodrum, which was built by the kind of invading knights, and this is in the 12th to 15th century, because the castle at the mausoleum was destroyed by earthquakes. And this is an example of spolia. This word I mentioned at the beginning. This is where, and it's also similar to the concept that of wapan that Wang Shu had, where you kind of mine an old piece of architecture for materials, and you create a new architecture out of it, because the intensive energy required to go back to the quarry is just not available when a new dynasty takes over. You can't go back to the quarry. You don't have the infrastructure available. And hey, look, there's another building. Let's just use that. What happens is you get this incredibly rich textural quality, and you can call it like a palimpsest, right? Where you have history from different era representing itself to you. So on the left, you see the cross sections of the columns, which were sitting at the top of the mausoleum, and on the right, some of the inscriptions and so on. This is an example, which again is a kind of classic example of this period, which is the Arch of Constantine. And interesting, this has been rebuilt, from I think early, the early kind of beginning of the first millennium. Rebuilt, over 500 years, not rebuilt entirely, but just each generation would add the signature of its own rulers, right? So it was basically transformed, and its meaning was changed. So its meaning was recycled, let's say. So whether it was adding the new user, the new the new dynasty, whether it was Emperor Trajan in 1112 or Emperor Constantine in 1315, the final architecture is a composite of all of that history. We see that very recently in Frankfurt, this Markthaus, where they looked at the archaeology on the site and they integrated the archaeology, the kind of remnants of old architecture into the building themselves. I mean, it's just an example. I'm not saying it from an aesthetic perspective. It's just the idea of reusing old materials. It's interesting, and it can create new possibilities. But like, where does this come from? Like this instinct that we have. What's an example of that? Like, this is an organism which has a fantastic relationship with the environment. It makes architecture. It's a tiny thing. It lives in this architecture for 70 years, 100 years, and it's basically a high riser. It's a city which has got an incredibly advanced relationship with its local climate and with its local material cycles. So it basically harvests and digests material from trees nearby, from wood nearby. We hate termites when we have cities because they're eating everything, but they themselves, I think, epitomize the most perfect city existence. Right? These termite mounds can be reused. They can decay, and they can be like, new termites can move in when the old colony dies, but at the same time, every element of this can be eaten and digested by another future termite and go and make another building, another termite mound. They've done some radioactive dating on some mounds which were found. They found that some of the mounds were thousands of years old. Like, they found a mound which was 3,800 years old. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So these last longer than our buildings at the moment. Our buildings, and for those of you who are not architects, it's a little secret of the construction industry, but buildings are rated to last 50 years. Yeah. You might think you're buying something, but the materials and the way that we build, which is such a kind of composite, complex way, the glue holding bits together won't last as long as the bits. 50 years is a life cycle. Sometimes 25 years is a guarantee given to certain materials before failure. And often it will be more expensive to replace than it is to repair. More expensive to repair than it is to replace. So another example, fantastic example, 150 million years guys have been doing it because they've got a very soft back leg. They've been recycling other material, the hermit crab, to use as their home, right? They move from home to home. They're using our material. They're recycling our stuff as well. They live from 20 to 70 years old. So this idea of using what you have, the minimal stuff that you have, being really efficient with your resources is something that nature does automatically, and it does it for survival. Human beings have done it for survival also for thousands of years. The yurt is the example I gave earlier. It's highly specific materials chosen for that environment. They're chosen in order to be portable, in order to be replaceable, capable of constant renewal. The felt blanket here is renewed by the sheep, which they take around with them. The camel takes us around the structure, which is just made of wooden poles and felt and rope. It can be moved around, it can be stitched back together, it can be transmitted to the next generation, it can change site. This is in Afghanistan. It's not just Mongolia and Kazakhstan. The yurt structures are similar. They're called something else, but they're similar there. It's this idea of not just portable architecture, but portable culture. And this is something that we used to do a lot. But look, hey, Buckminster Fuller also did this, right? So this was the idea of the future, and he was borrowing from the past. This is in the the 50s, 60s, a Dymaxion house, using materials which are factory made, factory assembled, factory made but assembled on site, very lightweight. I mean, it is a yurt. I don't think he refers to the yurt in the writing that I've read. But it's the idea of using materials efficiently, and the idea also of using energy-intensive materials like aluminium instead of using low-intensive, energy-intensive materials like tile or adobe. And I think his point is that it allows for mass production and repeatability. Now, we have a lot of capacity we had a lot of capacity built for aluminium production after all the wars that happened, you know, so aircraft production and so on. So it's more complex. The reason we end up with lots of these materials is because they have a kind of the factories exist and we don't know what to do with them anymore. But it's another big story. But now let's look at this. This is like one of the best examples ever of a kind of recyclable architecture, because it literally, like the termite mound, it can disappear into the ground. This is the igloo. This is in Frobisher Bay in Baffin Island, and mid 19th century. I mean, I don't know. You know, it's not a permanent home. It's the winter home. The summer home looked quite different. But what's remarkable about this? It's evolved by mankind, and it's the most efficient use of material to make a dome structure and to create covering. It's the most efficient way you can do it with block material, and you can look at the future of architecture and look at that. It looks very similar as well, right? So this is this is Mars, right? This is it's a different structural system. This is like an inflated dome, but instead of compressive, it's you know, about pressure equalization, and it's a inflatable structure. But when we're thinking about the pioneering, the absolute limits of architecture, the most efficient relationship with the environment, the most possibility to recycle and use natural materials, resources that we find there, we always find solutions like this. So this is I have to say it this way, this is the best we can do. This is the best we've ever done. This is the best we can do. It's the best we can think of. Look at this, could be the future, it could be the past. And you know, this idea of like, why we could even send these guys to Mars. These guys should be our astronauts. We're asking, you know, these are the scientists, right, who've dealt with this before. And if we look at elsewhere, you know, closer in the region, tension skins, again, these could work on Mars. The most efficient use, using the materials that are there. It's recyclable. It looks like architecture of the future, totally. And you see it again here elsewhere in the region. So
Asif,
I kind of just want to create
I have to really ask you to show us more. I mean, we want to see more your projects, because you know why? We're running out of time. It's amazing. I mean, you know, the time has flied. So I don't know. I need to move ahead so that you can show us more of your work. I want to see. So can you please state one environmental opportunity and one challenge that you had to face while designing or constructing a project?
Well, I think Museum of London. I mean, I'll return to this. I'll return to kind of the bigger kind of story here in a second. But I think for us, Museum of London represents because it's a project we're doing right now. It represents the sort of the challenge, but also the possibility of this recycling topic. You know, we had to work. The building is in ruin. We working very close with a conservation architect, Julian Harrop. The process had to be one of archaeology, right? It had to be treating the building as a material bank. What can we do with what's here? What can we exploit? Let's not just clear it all out and throw it all away. Let's go back to basics and do an inventory. And so the idea of you know, I showed you this slide here. Each of those bits of wood has got a code name on it. Yeah, all of these bits of wood are part of the. I mean, BIM, which is this building information modeling, it's in its infancy, but the idea that a BIM model can contain the identity of each building element. And that has an assignment for the future, like in that excess materials, the excess materials exchange that I showed you. This is something that's really possible. We're really trying this out for the first time, and maybe we are. It's in its infancy, but that site, the Museum of London site, the Smithfield Market, you know, was earmarked for demolition. You know, 10 years ago, it was earmarked for demolition. There was a huge campaign to try to save it. And what I just like about this is by choosing to save it, you enable the place to, you stretch our imaginations, right? Like the curators, the director of the museum, Sharon Ammon, she sort of said, okay, what could my museum be then? How would I adapt if I couldn't build this typical white cube state-of-the-art museum that is being built everywhere in the world? What else? What could this be? And maybe it can be something else. And maybe what it does by changing the architecture, it changes the way people behave and learn. And you can learn not by just looking at objects. You can learn through the experience of architecture. You can learn about the city. You can learn about materials. You learn about history and politics and economics. You learn by the story of what we've done. And in the end, I think. I said at the beginning that we use architecture to support new ways of thinking. This really is an example of that. This is like saying, how can what we do at the museum change the way we think about the city as a resource of ideas, resource of materials? I'd like I'd like to sort of return this idea as a challenge in a way to people, because I say, we said your waste is tomorrow's architecture, but also your city is future waste. Don't be under any illusions. Everything you're living in, everything you're designing is tomorrow's waste, right? So the question is really, what is it going to be? What can it be? How are you going to design it in such a way that it can be useful? And how can you reuse the waste that's there? Maybe the answer is to combine these two things I've been talking about. We've been living efficiently with the natural world. The natural world is being efficiently. We've been doing that for thousands of years, for millions of, for hundreds of thousands of years. The natural world has been doing it for thousands of years. It's an ecological system that we're part of, and it's in our nature to seek those efficiencies. It's in our nature to survive. But what we're doing at the moment is not survival. Yeah, it's sort of. It's a slow death. So kind of, I guess what I'd like to do is to say, as architects, as designers, as clients, let's try to embody the spirit of those pioneers, and have a close relationship, an efficient relationship with nature. The last 200 years we should treat as a blip in our history. Now the next 50 years, what are we going to do with it? Population is going to double. How are we going to survive? What are we going to do? And let's do it in a beautiful and elegant way, like people have done it before and like nature has done it before.
Okay, Asif, let me tell you where we are. We have like less than 3 minutes. So so I have a lot of questions from the audience, but Please. At the same time, I want to see if you have any other thing you want to show us before we go there. So do you want to say anything else or show us anything else, or we can go directly to the questions? Up to you.
No, I think, given that, I think I'd love to hear the questions. Yeah, and I'll use examples if the questions ask for examples.
Sure. I'm sorry for the time, but
No, it's fine. I have time to stay if you want me to stay, but it's people may not be able to. So
the live issue is there, so that's why. So there is one question that says that you have designed a number of pavilions. Do you have any favorites, or was any the most memorable to work on? I mean, it could be not only pavilion. I mean, any project.
Well, when you design something that when you visit there and people are having a kind of powerful experience, an experience you couldn't predict, this is the most fulfilling thing. And I remember when we did the Hyundai Pavilion, which was this completely black pavilion, which is surrounded by this nano coating called Vanta Black. The outside was black.
It's one of my favorites.
Thank you.
My favorites.
It was a really wild thing to see, and you'll have to look on the website. It's a completely black building with stars kind of located on each surface. But the thing that I found amazing, people were in a different kind of mental space. They had a completely different experience. It wasn't like a normal architectural experience to them. They were. It was a fantasy of some sort. And inside the building, it was completely white. It was the opposite. And we had an environment which was with water. and because it was all about hydrogen and future uses, future energy ecologies, basically. So this is Hyundai were interested in, and so we had hydrogen in the form of starlight outside, and inside we had it in the form of water. And there was a lady standing there. I remember very well. She stood there and she was crying, and she said to me, "Thank you." Thank you for. I mean, I say it's really rare it happens. I tell you, it doesn't happen very often as an architect. Like normally they say the opposite of to thank you.
No, I double that. I say double thank you.
Yeah, but it's very, it really touches you, and when your work connects with people, when kids are able to enjoy it, and old people, the whole demographic, people from a whole range of backgrounds, when it cuts through all of the kind of the theory, and it cuts through all of the complexities, and it just hits people. That's really what we want to do. It gives you a feeling like coming home, and that's yeah, that's the kind of architecture that I want to keep making, to give people that kind of spirit and connection with new natural experiences.
Amazing. Okay, so Asif, any closing thoughts on architecture and recycling, and what do you think our audience should take away from this interesting talk?
Well, I think of the city as a resource. Think of the city as nature. The city personifies our culture, it's got everything there, the finance, the law, all these aspects of it. But it's not something that is permanent. It's something that's always moving, it's always changing. And we should not be afraid to suggest new forms of culture and new forms of architecture for it. Don't feel you have to imitate. And clients, you guys, developers, if you're there, you should feel you've got a responsibility and opportunity to create the future, and it's not about extending the city for now. It's about building the first blocks of the future city. And I think change that mindset. You can't relocate the city. It's not like a yurt. You can't move it to another site. So what you've got to do is recycle it. And I think that's the way of thinking that we should have. And there's great opportunity there, to make something wonderful, to build a new ecology, learn from the light touch, and build something marvelous from the future.
Absolutely. So thank you, Asif, for this insightful and informative talk. Thank you all for tuning in, and please make sure to attend our next and final talk at the same time next week.
Thank you so much. Thank you, George. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks.